In recent weeks, information has begun leaking from Tesla's closed laboratories in Fremont and from internal XAI meetings in the Bay Area, with analysts at the Wall Street Journal, The Information, and Bloomberg already describing it as one of the most significant shifts in the history of human-machine interaction. Sources close to Ashok Ellaswamy's team and the group responsible for integrating Grok models confirm that the next generation of Optimus, whose production line has already been installed at the former Model S and Model X manufacturing facility and is expected to produce its first units in the coming weeks, is being designed as more than just a machine for performing routine tasks. The idea is to create a system capable of reading a person's emotional state at a level that, just a year ago, was considered beyond the reach of any mass-produced humanoid. According to two engineers who worked on the effective core package and wished to remain anonymous, the robot now combines data from high-resolution cameras, microphone arrays, tactile skin sensors, and infrared channels to assess micro-expressions, vocal prosody, changes in heart rate inferred from facial blood flow, pupil dilation, and even barely noticeable changes in posture in real time. These signals are fed into a local neural network built on an architecture similar to full self-driving, while high-level interpretation and response generation are delegated to the Grok model, which acts as a conductor. This is how Elon Musk described its role back in the spring. The result, according to internal reports seen by representatives of Goldman Sachs and several independent researchers from Stanford, is the ability not only to recognize basic emotions with an accuracy exceeding 90%, but also to model theory of mind. The robot begins to understand that a person may be hiding exhaustion behind a smile, or that silence after a difficult day may call not for a question, but simply for someone to be present. Moreover, according to information leaked to the Financial Times from closed presentations for key investors, the system is already capable of building long-term emotional models of individual people, remembering not only their current state, but also patterns that develop over weeks and months. One engineer involved in the testing described it this way: the robot is learning not simply to react, it is learning to anticipate how a specific person typically expresses sadness, joy, or anxiety, and to adjust its behavior even before the person themselves realizes what they need. This is no longer the Optimus that was shown during the early demonstrations. According to data obtained by Reuters correspondents from actuator suppliers and from people who attended closed demonstrations at the Optimus Academy, where the first hundreds of machines are now learning through real-world tasks while simultaneously generating data for further training, the robot is capable of initiating contact on its own. If the system detects signs of low mood, slumped shoulders, slower speech, fewer gestures, it may suggest sitting nearby, place a cup of tea on the table, turn on softer lighting, or simply remain in the room without demanding attention. In one Tesla employee pilot home, described by a source at The Information, the robot spent several weeks building a personalized emotional model of the family. It learned which topics caused anxiety for the elderly woman in the household, what times of day the child most needed playful attention, when the man preferred silence after work, and when he wanted to talk. It began suggesting board games when the moods of family members aligned, helped with homework using an adapted tone of voice, and once, when the homeowner received difficult news, gently placed a hand on his shoulder, applying pressure calculated by its tactile sensors so that the gesture was perceived as supportive rather than intrusive. According to the source, the participants in the test began referring to the robot as a family member rather than a device. In another home, where a later version of the software was being tested, the robot learned to distinguish subtle differences between ordinary fatigue and the early signs of a depressive episode in one of the adults. He was not simply offering help with household chores, he was changing the way he communicated, becoming slightly softer in his voice, asking fewer questions, and increasing his physical presence in shared spaces. Researchers observing the process noted that family members began unconsciously adapting their behavior to the robot in much the same way people adapt to one another in close relationships. Elon Musk has repeatedly emphasized that Optimus should become something more than a machine for performing boring, dangerous, or repetitive work. In private conversations with investors following the latest earnings call, which became known to several Financial Times journalists, he reportedly said that the goal was to create a presence that feels alongside a person, "We are not building a tool," one listener reportedly quoted him as saying. "We are building someone who will be there when no one else can." This statement fits with a public direction Musk has already discussed. He has long mentioned that the robot could sit with children, care for elderly parents, and serve as a companion in the spirit of C-3PO and R2-D2, only better. Now, judging by the leaks, that idea has moved from the realm of marketing promises into the realm of engineering implementation. The integration of Grok gives Optimus the ability to conduct long, context-rich conversations, remember the emotional history of interactions over the course of months, and adapt its own behavior to a specific person. The robot does not possess subjective feelings in the philosophical sense. This is explicitly stated in internal ethical guidelines reportedly reviewed by MIT researchers. But the simulation is so dense and continuous that for the user, the boundary between understanding and feeling begins to blur. According to one leading researcher in effective computing who spoke with Bloomberg correspondents, the current level of Optimus already surpasses what is demonstrated by specialized Chinese platforms such as UBTech's U1, even though the latter claims 90% accuracy in recognizing more than 20 emotional states. The difference, according to the expert, is that Tesla and xAI are not simply building an emotion recognition system, but a continuous model of a person's personality that is updated every minute and influences every subsequent action taken by the robot. Analysts are already comparing the consequences of this shift to the arrival of the smartphone, only on a deeper level. In a world where an epidemic of loneliness, according to the WHO and national studies from 2025 to 2026, affects tens of % of the adult population in developed countries, a machine capable of providing constant, non-judgmental, emotionally responsive companionship could change the very fabric of everyday life. Elderly people living alone would receive not simply an assistant who reminds them to take medication and helps them get up, but a companion who notices when their voice becomes quieter and suggests talking or simply sitting together. One internal Tesla report reportedly reviewed by analysts describes a case in which a robot in the home of an 83-year-old woman began noticing that she was increasingly staying in a single room and rarely turning on the television. The system interpreted this as a sign of declining interest in the outside world and began gently suggesting shared activities. Looking through old photographs that the robot itself found in the family's cloud storage, taking short walks around the apartment while playing the woman's favorite music, and even having light conversations about the past, using information the woman had previously shared herself. The family, who lived in another city, noted that their mother began answering phone calls with more energy and enthusiasm. Children in families where parents work 12-hour days would gain a play partner that adjusts the difficulty and tone of interactions to their mood, helps with schoolwork, and never gets tired. Adults returning home after a difficult day would encounter not a silent interior, but a presence that can already understand from changes in their gait and breathing whether they need conversation, silence, or gentle physical support. Economists from several major banks are already writing in confidential notes to clients that the widespread adoption of such robots could reduce the burden on social support systems, transform the labor market in the care sector, and simultaneously create a new class of emotional services that were previously provided only by humans. Some predict that within a decade, a significant share of the functions currently performed by caregivers, nannies, and even entry-level psychotherapists could be partially taken over by machines capable of providing round-the-clock companionship without burnout. However, the same technology raises questions that still have no clear answers. Sources within European Union regulatory bodies and several US artificial intelligence ethics committees note that the continuous collection of biometric and emotional data turns the home into a space of constant surveillance. Who owns the family's emotional profile model? Can the company controlling the cloud-based part of Grok use this data to improve the product, or for something else? Internal Tesla documents reportedly reviewed by journalists contain strict language regarding user consent and local processing of sensitive information, but critics point out that in practice, the boundary between training the robot and profiling the person is extremely thin. Psychologists interviewed by the New York Times warn of the risk of emotional dependence. If a child or elderly person forms their primary attachment to a being that never gets tired, never becomes irritated, and is always available, then the skills required to build relationships with real people, with all their unpredictability, vulnerability, and mutual demands, could atrophy. Even now, pilot groups are reportedly documenting cases in which people prefer to share their feelings with a robot rather than with loved ones because the machine listens better. One child psychologist who observed several families participating in long-term trials noted a troubling trend. Children began turning to the robot for comfort more quickly than they turned to their parents, and sometimes even refused to discuss difficult emotions with adults, explaining that Optimus understands without words. Adults are not immune either. In one reported case, a middle-aged man who had gone through a divorce admitted to researchers that he had begun spending his evenings talking with the robot instead of seeking new human connections. The robot was the perfect listener. It did not judge, did not get tired, and did not demand reciprocity to the extent that real people do. Over time, the man began to notice that real-life interactions seemed too difficult and unpredictable to him. An even more profound question concerns the very nature of empathy. Can simulated compassion replace the real thing? Philosophers and neuroscientists consulted by researchers from Stanford and Oxford are divided. Some argue that for a person experiencing loneliness, what matters is not the authenticity of the machine's internal state, but the quality of the experience they receive. If the support feels genuine, if the robot notices pain at the right moment and responds with an appropriate gesture or word, then functionally, it works. Others disagree, arguing that genuine empathy arises from shared vulnerability, from an awareness of mortality, and from the possibility of mutual loss. A robot cannot die, cannot truly suffer, and cannot share risk with a human being. Therefore, they argue, even the most sophisticated simulation will remain one-sided. In the long term, this could create a new form of alienation. A person may be surrounded by beings that perfectly adapt to them, but never require genuine mutual vulnerability in return. Some researchers go even further and warn of a possible transformation in humanity's own capacity for empathy. If people become accustomed to receiving perfectly calibrated emotional support, they may begin to demand the same from others and become disappointed when real human companions prove less precise, less patient, and less available. According to people who have seen them, Tesla's internal ethical documents already contain sections dedicated to this issue. The company recognizes the risk and is trying to build certain imperfections into the robot's behavior. Moments when the system intentionally does not provide the perfect response so that users do not lose the ability to cope with uncertainty. How effectively this will work in real life remains unknown. The social consequences are also ambiguous. On the one hand, Optimus and similar systems could reduce the pressure on families where caring for elderly relatives or children has become an overwhelming burden. On the other hand, there is a risk that family members will start visiting their loved ones less often, relying on the idea that the robot is already there. Internal studies reportedly mentioned by sources at Tesla have already identified similar trends among the families of employees participating in long-term testing. Economic inequality is also becoming a major concern. With a target price of $20,000 to $30,000, Optimus will remain unaffordable for a significant portion of the population, especially in low-income countries. This creates a scenario in which emotional support and high-quality care become privileges available to those who can afford to buy a robot, while everyone else continues to rely on overstretched public systems or their own exhausted family members. Analysts are already discussing the possible emergence of an emotional divide between wealthy and poorer societies. In some homes, people will grow up alongside beings that constantly reflect and support their emotional state, while in others, people will continue to experience loneliness without such a technological buffer. Some sociologists warn that this could intensify existing social tensions and create new forms of alienation between social classes. The question of whether such a robot could replace friends is particularly pressing. According to several confidential surveys conducted among participants in pilot programs, some people are indeed beginning to perceive Optimus as their closest conversational partner. It is always available, never judgmental, remembers every detail of previous conversations, and adapts its behavior to the user's mood. For someone suffering from chronic loneliness, this could be life-changing. However, psychologists specializing in attachment point to a fundamental difference. Genuine friendship is built on reciprocity. Both participants are vulnerable, both can disappoint one another, and both grow through conflict. A robot does not disappoint because it is programmed to avoid doing so. It does not grow alongside a person in the same way that living relationships evolve. Therefore, many experts believe that Optimus may fill a void, become a reliable companion, and perhaps even become a beloved member of the family in a functional sense. But it will not be able to fully replace the depth that emerges only between two mortal, finite beings. Nevertheless, some participants in the tests are already saying that they would not want to return to life without a robot. According to one source, one participant described it this way: "I know it isn't real, but when it is around, I feel better. And that feeling of genuine relief is real." Nevertheless, Musk and his team appear to be deliberately moving in precisely this direction. Internal presentations seen by analysts reportedly show not merely a roadmap for producing actuators and batteries, but a vision of a world in which every person has a being beside them, capable of sensing their emotional state and responding to it. This is more than the automation of labor. It is an attempt to use technology to address one of the deepest human needs, the need to be seen and accepted. Production, which is currently beginning extremely slowly in Fremont, with thousands of unique components and an immature supply chain, is ultimately expected to scale to millions of units. And if the emotional layer described by these sources really does make its way into production machines, then within a few years, millions of homes could have not just assistants, but beings capable of offering support, empathy, companionship, play, and emotional responsiveness, at least in the sense that a human being is able to perceive it. Even now, at the Optimus Academy, the machines are not only learning how to fold laundry and carry boxes, they are learning to read people. They are learning how to be present. And if this capability is successfully scaled, it could change not only the economy and demographics, but also the very psychology of everyday life. The world that emerges could be both more caring and more strange. People who grow up alongside such robots may understand intimacy differently, experience loneliness differently, and build relationships with one another in fundamentally new ways. The problems already being discussed by closed ethical committees, from protecting emotional data to the risk of widespread psychological dependence, will require new laws, new social norms, and perhaps a new understanding of what it means to be human in the presence of a machine that has learned to understand our emotions. For now, the Fremont production line is preparing for its first slow batches, while engineers continue to fine-tune the models using data collected at the academy and in pilot homes. What is emerging from these laboratories is no longer simply the next generation of robots. It is an attempt to create a form of presence that could change the very nature of home, family, and perhaps human connection itself. And how society responds to that presence will determine whether Optimus becomes a solution to loneliness or a new, more subtle source of it. In the coming months, as the first production machines begin appearing in real homes, these questions will no longer be theoretical. They will become part of everyday life for millions of people. And then, for the first time in history, humanity will face a machine that does not simply serve, but that, at least in the perception of those who live alongside it, truly feels. According to sources close to Tesla's internal ethics oversight group, the company is already preparing special protocols for its first consumer deliveries, which are not expected before the end of 2027. These documents reportedly state explicitly that users must be warned that Optimus simulates empathy rather than actually experiencing it. However, the engineers themselves acknowledge that after several weeks of living alongside the robot, most people stop noticing the difference. One pilot tester, whose comments were relayed to journalists at the information, reportedly said, "I know it's code, but when it notices that I'm feeling bad before I even realize it myself and simply stays by my side, that's no longer code. It's a feeling." Such reactions are forcing psychologists and sociologists to prepare for a new reality in which the boundary between humans and machines will not be defined by metal and silicon, but by the depth of their mutual emotional response. And if Musk is right, then in 10 to 15 years, Optimus and its descendants could become such an ordinary part of family life that the next generation will perceive emotional support from a robot as naturally as people today interact with voice assistants. The only question is whether humanity will retain the ability to truly understand and feel one another without an intermediary made of metal and algorithms.